In this video, you're going to learn how to make one of these hanging cones that you can put lots of little gifts in for your friends or store things in. You're not going to believe how easy they are, so make along with me. The first thing you're going to do is select two fabrics, and you don't need a lot. You're going to cut a long piece out that's 17 3/4 inches by 2 inches. And that's going to form your binding and your hanging loop. And if you want, you can make it longer and have a longer loop. But if you watch the video through first before you start, you'll know what to do. And you want two squares, and they both want to be 7 inches by 7 inches. I suggest contrasting or matching fabrics, and it doesn't matter whether your long piece is out of the one you're going to line it with or the one that you're going to put on the outside. So let's get started. The first thing we're going to do is take the two squares, and you're going to place one on top of the other with the right sides facing. And then we're going to sew some seams. So all you're going to do is pin or clip. It doesn't matter if you use pins or clips. And we're just going to clip two of the edges. And it's two edges that meet at a corner. So as you can see, it's just going to be those two. And then all we're going to do to start with is sew along those two seams, not the other two sides of the square, just those two. So you start at one end and you're just going to run a few stitches. Now don't get so stressed about seam allowance. I just ran it so that the fabric was on the edge of my foot. That's simple, but really don't stress about it. But when you start, you want to do a little bit of reversing just to secure your seam. And then you're going to run straight down that edge, making sure you're nice and straight to the corner. When you get to the corner, put your needle in, lift the foot, turn through 90 degrees, and away you go again. And then you're just going to run along to the other end, and then we're going to repeat that reverse. And then everything will be nice and secure. And then it's back to our working area. And before you turn anything out, just clip off that corner that you've sewn. Not too close to your stitches, but it's just going to remove some bulk so that when you turn it out, it sits nicely. So then turn out your squares and just tidy it up. So you might find you need to poke a chopstick or the back of your scissors or something into that corner just to get it to pop out nicely. And then I recommend pressing those seams you've just done. Or you could do what I'm doing, which is just run your fingernail along them, but you want them nice and flat. And then we're going to form the cone shape. So I'm choosing to put the red on the outside of mine and just wrap up that cone so that the raw edges are at the top and you're overlapping your sewn seams. And you want to overlap by about 3/4 inch on the top. That should do it nicely. So if when you come to do it, you're realising your seams aren't as tidy as you wanted, just tidy them up, make sure they've pulled through as far as you want, and then pin or clip that top. And then you can just make sure it's all lined nicely. And if you want to, you could add another clip or pin at this point. And then once you are happy with it, before we sew it, we're going to just fold it. You can see I'm just checking there that everything's lying nicely. And then we're going to fold it so that that bit is on the edge of the fold where you've got your overlap. And then that's what we're going to sew. So just pin or clip along that edge. And then again, you're going to want to check everything is just how you want it to be before you head over to the machine. Once at the machine, you want to set it to a small zigzag. And I recommend starting at the pointy end. Now you may have some difficulties, it's really quite thick, and you will see that I just lift my foot and move it a small way. Lift the foot and move it a small way. And then I've done a little reverse at the bottom there as well. And then you just want to run right up that edge with your small zigzag. Ideally right on the edge, but don't worry if you're not. Nobody's going to be judging you or marking you. And then just keep going all the way to the top. And again, little tiny reverse, just to secure it. So now you've formed a cone, and it should be a nice neat edge. You might have contrasting thread, you might have matching thread, it's up to you. So now we need to bind the top. So let's prepare our binding. You're going to fold and press in on either side a little hem. Now this needs to be about 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimetre if you're metric, and you're just going to do it all the way along. So be careful with the iron, don't have it on steam because you've got your fingers in there, and just make sure you don't touch your fingers. And then repeat it down the other long side. So you can see we're going to end up with no raw edges and some nice clear fold marks that you're going to sew along or fold along in a moment. So let's start wrapping that binding. It doesn't really matter where you start, but I tend to start part way up one side, and you need to place it so that the right side of the binding is against the right side of the outside, and make sure your two squares stay lined up, and then just pin it in place. We're going to sew along the fold line, so you might want to pin along it. I don't tend to worry too much, but that's up to you. So you're going to take yourself up to that point at the top, and then you have to turn and come back down the other side and pin again, and just keep pinning all the way round until you get back to where you started. Just make sure you're keeping all those edges together. And when you get back to where you started, you want to overlap a little way, and then you're going to cut the excess off, and that's what's going to make your hanging loop. So as I say, if you'd made that strip longer, you would have been able to make a longer hanging loop. So the bit that you started with, it's worth going back and just folding the end over. And what I do is I fold it, and then I just put a little pin in to hold it in place, so that when you end up completing this binding, there will be no raw edges. Then the bit you've overlapped, you don't need to overlap it too much. I don't know, 3/8 of an inch, half an inch, just something like that. It's not an exact measurement. It's just so long as you don't get a gap. So then it's over to the machine and just sew all the way around on the fold line. So I tend to find if I'm sewing something small like this, it's easier to open it up. If your machine does that, it really helps. If your machine doesn't do that, don't worry, just be a little bit trickier. So just when you're going around small round things. So get yourself lined up so that your needle's on the fold and set off. And you're just going to keep working all the way around, taking your pins out as you go. If things start to move around, just pause. And you can see I've got to the top now. So I've put the needle in, lifted the foot, turned, made sure everything's still lined up beautifully, and then put the foot back down. And now I'm going to work my way down the other side of the cone. So again, it's important to stay in the fold, and those pins are holding everything in place. And just work your way around. Obviously, when you come to the seam at the bottom, there's quite a bit of thickness there, but you should be okay. It should go over it just fine. When you come to the overlap, you've just got to be a little bit careful, because you don't want to sew the pin you put in, but you don't want that little folded over end to come undone. So you'll see I've just taken that pin out and then just taking it steady over there. Keep going till you end up overlapping the sewing you've already done. So make sure you do go over where you started to secure it, and then a little reverse, and then it should be nice and secure. So when you get back to your work area, you're going to find you've got a binding on the top. Not very tidy yet, but you have got a binding on the top. So what we're going to do is fold it over, but I do recommend the point at the top, just snipping off any bulk there. Again, not too close to your stitches. It's just going to help it go over nicely. And then you're going to fold your binding over, and you can see how it's going to look. And then you need to fold it down to cover that seam you've got at the top. And you've got that folded edge, and you're going to make sure that folded edge lines up with where you've sewn on the outside. Now, the way to be sure is when you put your pins in, it should be right on the edge inside and right on the edge on the outside, or halfway, or however you choose to do it. I put my pins where I'm going to sew, which is very close to the edge, so that if I keep sewing through where the pins are, I know my stitching will end up on the binding and not part way down the cone, because I don't want that. So just keep fiddling with it, working your way around until you're happy with how it's positioned and where your pins are. Because the next step is to go over to the machine and sew that. So I can't stress enough, get your pins right and your stitching will follow. So over at the machine, you're going to find this a little bit awkward again, but just get yourself lined up exactly in line with your pins and set off. I find that's the easiest way. I make sure my pins and my edge and everything's all lined up. And just work your way around. Again, when you get to the top, you'll have that little bit of awkward, which you may need to put the needle in and turn it. You might find you don't need to, but you probably will. And then you're going to come back to where you started and do your usual little overlap where you started, do a little reverse, and then it's all nice and secure. So we've not got much left to do. As you can see, we're going to have a nice cone, and all we need to do is hang it. So that bit you cut off, you're going to fold it in half, but also at either end you want to secure those raw edges. So you can open the whole thing right up, fold in the end and then refold the sides, or you can just fold in the end and secure it. But I do recommend getting rid of those raw edges. It's a much better finish. You can see me fiddling about trying to get mine right. And then just pin or clip those ends. And then all you need to do is go over to the machine and sew along the open edge, and it will just secure everything nicely. Some people choose to do 2 rows of stitches. I tend to just do the one, unless I'm doing big bag straps or something. So on something like this, I would just run along. So again, do a little reverse before you set off, and then run along. Nice and tidy, same distance from the edge all the way down, however far that is, that's up to you. And then when you get to the end, a little reverse to secure it. So it doesn't matter how long you've made this strap, it's the same technique. If you've got a longer strap, it's just going to have a longer hanger. And then we need to position it on the cone. So form the loop that you want, and then you know it's exactly how you want it to be, and then place it on the back of your cone. And then pin or clip it in place and make sure you're happy. What I tend to do is overlap the ends so they're at 90 degrees to each other, and it makes a nice loop. But what matters here is that you're happy before you start sewing. And then we're literally going to hand sew it in place. So you'll see I take it off and make a few stitches to secure the end. It's up to you. And then I will sew one end in place, but I know where it goes because I've just pinned it there. I'm double checking. And then I'm going to place it in line with the binding and just secure a little stitch from the cone, a little stitch from the hanging loop, and back again the other way. Just a little bit of one, a little bit of the other, until you've been all the way around and you're happy. And then you're going to form your loop and sew that on, remembering it's at 90 degrees. So if you're enjoying this video, please do give it a thumbs up below so it spreads to more people. These make great cones for storing things, and they're really good for gifts at Christmas. You can hang them on people's trees, you can put little toys in, sweets, chocolates. Just a great gift idea and a great storage idea. Hang them on the edge of a shelf in your office or your study or your craft room, pop little bits in. Once you're happy it's nice and secure and you're all the way around and you're happy with how it's hanging, and if you're not, just do a few more stitches. But once you're happy, it's time to secure the end. So just do a little stitch and then put the needle through the loop before you pull it tight. Do a couple and you know it's nice and secure. And there you have it. You've finished your cone. So I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope you're going to make many more. You could even scale it up and make larger ones. So thank you for watching and enjoy your sewing.